Becoming unrecognizable in your 20s is actually really simple, and it just comes down to three pillars. I noticed something that a lot of guys I look up to have in common. They're healthy, interesting, and confident, and when you look at how they live, their lives basically revolve around these three things. But for some reason, most guys fall off during this decade. And it's not because they're lazy, it's because the world we live in is literally designed to keep you comfortable and distracted. And modern self-improvement advice just makes everything worse. It gets so complicated and overwhelming that it makes you feel like you need to be rich and without a job just to get your life together. And I mean, I've been there, just watching podcast after podcast, scrolling through YouTube, and just wondering what the hell I'm even supposed to do to start. Now, I'm 25 and nowhere near mastering any of this, but I've started using these three pillars as my North Star. This way, by the time I'm in my 30s and 40s, I can be completely unrecognizable from who I am today. Not just physically, but in what I'm capable of. Now, the first pillar is the simplest one, but it's also the hardest to stay consistent with. And it's being physically capable. Being in shape matters way more than just how you look. And the discipline it takes to stay healthy bleeds into everything else in your life. Your work, your hobbies, and your relationships. If you can show up to train when you don't really feel like it, that mindset carries over everywhere. But I think most advice about getting in shape gets it wrong. It usually has something to do with going into a winter arc and hitting bench PRs and just squatting until your knees can't take it anymore. And trust me, I've had many years where all I cared about was my numbers going up and also getting a pump. But over time, I've realized that there's a huge difference between looking strong and being strong. And I think being fit isn't just bigger muscles or having more weight on the bar. I think it's more about being athletic and functional. And once I started adding things like calisthenics, jumping, sled pushes, I started feeling like an actual athlete instead of a guy that just lifts. Most guys also completely avoid cardio, but cardio builds a different kind of grit than lifting does. And pushing through that kind of discomfort trains you mentally in a way that just carries into everything else in your life. And if you have the time and the money to continue investing in yourself, I would highly recommend starting martial arts as well. I've only been training for a couple of months, and I already feel way more confident and humble at the same time. But honestly, none of this matters if you ignore the most overlooked parts, your nutrition and sleep. Because you can train as hard as you want, but if you're sleeping like garbage and eating like garbage, you're never going to feel high energy or capable. Because most guys nowadays are just running on energy drinks, a lot of gas station food, and then they're wondering why they feel terrible all the time. So if you actually want to feel capable instead of tired, you have to start sleeping and eating like it matters. So the second pillar to becoming unrecognizable is mental development. And honestly, this might be the hardest one for our generation, just because we live in a world with constant stimulation. Whether it's TikTok, YouTube, or Netflix, it seems like your brain never really gets a break. So whenever you do have free time, you automatically default to those things rather than spending your mental energy on something productive. But you can't become unrecognizable if you don't train your brain the same way that you train your muscles. And I think the easiest place to start is just by reading. Just including a little bit of reading every day starts to change how you think. You start to become more well-spoken, your vocabulary improves, you learn about history, philosophy, how people think, and slowly it changes the way you see the world. And I think another essential piece of this pillar is learning a new skill that either improves your life or increases your income. And this could be anything ranging from learning how to code or edit videos, all the way to handyman work like working on your car or doing carpentry. And these things might not feel huge in the moment, but the skills compound over the decades. And the last thing you want is to wake up at 40 or 50 years old and realize that you don't know how to do anything because you spent all those years just consuming content. For me personally, I knew I was always terrible at public speaking, and I wanted to change that, so I decided to join a Toastmasters group. And every time I go, I'm so nervous to speak, but that's exactly why I go, because leaning into that discomfort is what rewires your brain and levels you up over time. Now, the third and final pillar is creativity. And this is one that no one really talks about much because it doesn't really fit into the standard hustle culture. But I just want you to think about when you were a kid. You probably created stuff all the time, like drawings or making up games, or just building random stuff outside. And that's not because it was productive, it was just because you were doing it out of boredom. But with the constant stimulation we get today, we're never bored, and I think that really kills your creativity. But before the internet, people would read, write, and play music simply for the love of the game. Now for me, I realized I was spending hours watching personal finance content because I genuinely liked it, but I thought, why am I consuming all of this when I could be making it instead? And once you start creating, those ideas start slowly coming back to you and you get excited to make more. And naturally, you just become more interesting because you're contributing to society rather than always just consuming. Becoming unrecognizable in your 20s isn't glamorous, but you also don't have to turn into David Goggins either. If you're just intentional with a few hours each week across all of these pillars, over time, that will compound into something massive. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they have an all or nothing mindset. We think that if we can't follow the perfect routine for everything, we may as well not even try. But you have to remember that this only works because of consistency and not perfection. Even if it's just a few hours a week of working out and reading and maybe just a small creative habit, that's enough to start moving the needle. And once you start, that discipline from one pillar will naturally bleed into all the others. And personally, that's the system I'm trying to build. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.